Okay, so like I said, lots to get through today. I mentioned last week that really the rest of this series for the next few weeks, we're really going to be answering two practical and applicable questions. The first one is this: what are the actual rhythms and patterns and practices of holiness and holy living according to God? Like when we talk about holiness and holy living and living in these rhythms and patterns, God has an opinion, right? He has an opinion on how we live our lives. And so what are the things that God sets aside and makes holy? Like what are those rhythms? What are those practices? What does God say is really the best way to live, right? So that's kind of the first question we're going to answer. And then the second question we're going to answer is, how do we do this? Like, how do we ourselves, how do we live in these rhythms and patterns ourselves? And how do we live them out for other people to see? Because that matters. Again, that's kind of why God created us. When you go back into the creation narrative, which we're going to read today, like God created people, and the purpose that he gave us was to reflect his character and his identity to all of creation, so that when creation sees people, they catch a glimpse of who God is, right? So God has an opinion. How we live our lives matters to him. Why? Because we're designed to reflect who he is to everything and everyone around us. And it's these holy rhythms and holy patterns, like shifting into those. That's how we do that. Now, let me just say this before we dive in today. What we're going to talk through today is not so much, I don't want to teach or tell you what you should think, right? Because I could just stand up here and go, hey, here's a list of things that I need you to do. Just check these boxes by the end of the week and let's see what happens. I don't want to teach you or tell you what to think. What I want to teach is how to think. That's what Jesus did. Jesus didn't tell his followers, didn't teach his disciples what to think. He taught them how to think. So that when they interacted with the world, when they interacted with other people, right, they began to think like Jesus. They began to see the world through the same lens that he saw the world through. So that's really what today's going to be about, right? And really the rest of the series. It's not like, hey, here's some things for you to do, but rather, hey, let's think about this a little different. Like how we think about our lives should look a little different. And according to the Bible, the answers to both of these questions, and when it comes to how we are to think, gets tied to something that's called sanctification, right? Which is kind of an old school churchy word that literally means this. Sanctification is the process by which a holy, the word holy means unique and unlike anything or anyone else. It's the process by which a holy God deems and declares and makes people and practices holy. It's the process by which God, who is unlike anything or anyone, makes practices and people also unlike anything or anyone. And if you read through the Bible, what you find is this: God focuses his holiness really on those two things: people and practices. And this is kind of what we talked about in the last few weeks, all right? I'm going to go really fast. Follow me as best you can, right? Broken and messy people have the opportunity to be made holy, to be sanctified by God through faith in Jesus. And then once that happens, there are these everyday practices, rhythms, and patterns, ways to live that God also sanctifies and deems holy and sets apart from the rest. And those sanctified practices and patterns are set apart for sanctified people, right? That's just basically, you can sum up the last 4 weeks in those few sentences. And you're like, dang, Brad, why couldn't you have talked that fast before, right? But here's the deal. Jesus makes us this promise: when sanctified people engage in these sanctified rhythms and patterns, it leads to what he calls the abundant life. And that's life to the full. That's life maxed out. That's life as God intends and desires our lives to be. Sanctified people living sanctified lives in and through obedience and love is the essence of what we at Adventure call the with God life. Right? The with God life is an opportunity to live our lives with God, God within us, in this relationship, right? And again, the way we get through that is the way we live that life is through this process of sanctification, which is shifting our lives into the rhythms and patterns of holiness. But like I said last week, as we get really practical with how to do this, the holy rhythms and patterns of sanctification really involve two key shifts, right? We shift away and we shift towards. And here's the thing: it's both and, not either or. right? So both of these shifts, shifting away from and shifting towards, those are happening together simultaneously, right? Both and, not either or. Let me explain, right? We grow in holiness by persistently engaging in the rhythms and patterns that move us away from sin and disobedience. Sin and disobedience, which ruin our lives and ruin our relationship with God. At the same time that we're shifting away from disobedience and sin, we shift towards, right? We are consistently engaging in the holy and sanctified rhythms and patterns that move us toward the abundant life that God promises. And so it's this kind of collision of being consistent and persistent. I'm persistently moving away from sin. Though sin will try to drag me back down, it will try to pull me back down into old rhythms and old patterns and old ways of living. I am persistent in my effort, right, to move away from that, while also growing in my consistency, being consistent with the things, the rhythms and practices that God says are holy. And this is really kind of where we left off last week. See, throughout the Bible, what you find is there are really 4 actions and activities that God declares as holy, right? Which I love that. It's not 4,000. It's not 400. It's just 4, right? God keeps it really simple, right? He gives us these activities that are set apart to help us grow in holiness and in holy living. And God, he keeps it real simple. Here they are: fasting, Sabbath, tithing, and prayer. That's it. Like, that's it. And we talked about fasting a little bit last week, but each of these activities and actions that God declares to be holy, these things are set apart. They're unique. They're the only things like them. They're all entirely rooted in God's love for us and his desire that seeks what is best and what is good for us. And so when we begin to engage in these 4 actions and activities through obedience and love, we find that each of these, right, fasting, Sabbath, tithing, and prayer, each one of those kind of has this natural both and rhythm of sanctification. Fasting and Sabbath and tithing and prayer, they all move us away from sin and toward holiness at the same time. And we unpacked a little bit last week, like I said, how fasting does this. Today, we're going to unpack these holy rhythms and patterns of Sabbath, right? So grab your Bibles or your Bible app. You're going to open to Genesis chapter 1, right? It's like the first page, so you don't have to go very far. So Genesis chapter 1, and when you get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, right, just like hold your place right there, because I got a quick story for us before we dive into this. So 21 years ago, after 2 years of dating and about a year of being engaged, on January 2nd, 2004, my wife and I, we got married. Christy and I got married. It was the best day of her life, right? She is so lucky and so blessed, right? The ceremony was beautiful. Like, all of our friends and family were there. The reception was a blast. We had a live band at our reception. People danced. There was an open bar, which meant the dancing got real awkward later on, right? It was a party. The cake, the wedding cake was amazing. The toasts from like the maid of honor and the grooms, like the grooms, it was amazing. All the toasts were great. But the time came for us to leave the reception. Right, we had a flight to catch for our honeymoon the next morning. And so we leave the reception, we get in my truck, we drive to the hotel, we get checked into the hotel, we go up to our hotel room, we get in our room. I change out of my tux, which was a sweaty mess because your boy goes real hard on the dance floor, right? I love to dance. I can't dance, but daggone it, I love it, right? That's the one thing. I was talking with someone last week, like, when I get to heaven, here's what I want. I said, I've got one thing, just one request of God, right? And that is, God, I want to be able to dance. Right? You can fly, all that kind of, whatever the stuff I just want to be able to dance. Like, and when I mean dance, I mean like, dang, that guy can dance, right? I can't do that, right? I'm a terrible dancer, which is odd because I play rhythm instruments, right? But still, terrible dancer. So I change out of my tux, Christy changes out of her wedding dress, and then we sit down across from each other at this desk in our hotel room, and we spent the rest of our wedding night writing out and agreeing to a bullet point list of the tasks and the roles and responsibilities, all the duties and chores that we would commit to doing for one another for the rest of our marriage. That's what we spent the rest of our wedding night. Like, it was just like, we're going to just kind of keep writing out this list of all the things that we're going to commit to doing for one another, all the chores, all the things. Like, I'll take out the trash if you do this, and I'll do this if you do that. We spent the rest of our night doing that as a means of, because we really felt like at this point in our marriage, it's brand new, like we have to figure out, like, what are the things that we're willing to do to prove our love for one another? I just want to prove to you, Christy, that I love you. So here's the things I'm willing to do. I'll take out the trash if you fold the laundry. I'll put the groceries away if you'll go to the grocery store and buy them. I'll walk the dog if you feed him. I'll clean up the kitchen if you can cook dinner, right? And we spent hours and hours and hours of our wedding night working on that list. And when we finally got it where we wanted, we agreed that by doing the tasks on this list, that would be how we would prove our love to one another from that day on. And then after that, we shook hands and went to sleep. And for 21 years we've been married, we've done our best to check all those boxes. My love for Christy and her love for me are based on how many of those boxes we can check for one another. Do you believe that? No, right? First off, that sounds awful, right? I'd like to begin this covenant relationship by establishing a set of rules that we both agree to live by and tasks that we agree to accomplish, right? From this day forth till death do us part, right? Agree? Right? Yeah, that sounds awful. And also, that's not how love works. That's not what love looks like. Real love and true relational intimacy do not flourish and grow when they're rooted in conditions and rules and contractual agreements. That's actually counterfeit love. Now, from the outside looking in, you might see the things that I do for Christy, right? If this is how we based our relationship, was just on this list of things that we need to do, you might look at our relationship and you might see all of the things that I do for Christy, and you might see all the things that she does for me, and you would go, man, they really love each other. Look what they do. But here's the truth. You and I, we can accomplish everything on a to-do list in a relationship day in and day out and still have a lifeless and soulless relationship. Now, thankfully, that's not how Christy and I began our marriage, right? We didn't sit down and make a list of tasks and chores and rules to prove our love for one another. Here's what happened. Long before our wedding night, we committed to loving one another and to kind of fostering the kind of climate and culture and environment in our relationship where real love and real intimacy could grow and flourish. And let me tell you, sometimes that was easy. Sometimes that is easy. Other times in our life and in our marriage, it's been really difficult to do that, right? That's why, I think if you ask Christy and I, that's why we are such huge fans and advocates for counseling. Because sometimes we just need help, right? We can't see the forest for the trees, right? We need help in this. But here's what happened. Here's what happens. Over time, throughout our marriage, as our love for one another grows, and it continues to grow, there are tasks, roles, and responsibilities and chores that we do for one another, but we do those things in and out of a place of love first. Right? The actions and activities we engage in are a means of reflecting our love for one another. That love that already exists. It's been pre-established. And so what we do for one another is not a means of earning love from one another, nor is it an attempt to try to prove our love to the other one in hopes that we might get something in return. That's not how it works. I'm not doing the things that I do to prove that I love you, and hopefully that convinces you to love me back. That's not how it works. The things we do for one another reflects the love we have for one another. And so the more we do, the more we love, because that love existed in the first place. And you can see the difference, right? You see the difference in how this works. There are things that we do, but what we do comes out of who we are. Our doing comes out of our being, right? The same concept applies to our relationship with God. You can do a ton. You can do a ton of religious activities. You can sign up for every Bible study. You can attend every small group. You can go on every mission trip. You can never miss a Sunday, right? You can do all of these religious activities and still have a lifeless and soulless faith. If our relationship with God is not rooted and established in our love for him and his love for us first, that all of the actions, all of the things that we do, even though we're doing a lot, there's no life in those. There's no soul in those because there's no love in those, right? Our external action, right? One is external action with no internal intimacy. The other is internal intimacy that leads to external action. And that's kind of how that works. That's the way that God designed this to work, right? Here's what Jesus had to say about this. We're going to get to Genesis 1, I promise, in just a second. Here's what Jesus had to say about this in Matthew 23. He said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites." These were like the religious leaders. These were people that did not fail, that did not fall short when it came to the amount of religious activity they engaged in. These were people that never missed a Sunday, knew what all the Bible said, knew all the words to the worship songs, right? They never missed a Bible study. They never missed a small group. They attended all this. They were religious. And he says, "Woe to you religious people who just engage in religious activity." He says, "You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence." He says, "You're blind, you blind Pharisee, you blind religious person, you blind self-righteous person. First, clean the inside of the cup and plate, that the outside then may also be clean." And he says again, "Woe, you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly you appear beautiful, but within, on the inside, you're full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So outwardly you appear righteous to others, but within you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." Jesus had big time beef with external action being disconnected from internal intimacy. Self-righteousness equals counterfeit love. Religious activity without relationship equals counterfeit love. It says this, look at the things that I've done to prove my love for God. And then it looks at God and says, "God, I've earned the right now to be loved back." And that's not how it works. Here, Brad, where are you going with this? Again, the same concept. Internal intimacy that leads to external action. It applies to all of these rhythms and patterns of holiness. Right? Internal intimacy, that relationship that leads to the activities, that leads to the reflection of love, right? That's the essence of all of these rhythms and patterns of holiness. They're all rooted in love that work its way out into action, but it is the absolute core of this thing called Sabbath. The point of Sabbath, right, throughout Scripture, is to cultivate internal intimacy with God and holiness so that can then fuel the external actions of holy living. That's the point of Sabbath. That's the whole point of Sabbath. It's to cultivate this relational intimacy with God. It's to grow our love for God and grow in realizing his love for us so that then becomes the fuel by which we engage in holy living. The word Sabbath literally means to pause, to cease from creation, or to rest. And here's the truth. We cannot try to rest our way into truly loving and truly being loved by God. It doesn't work. You can't go, all right, I'm just going to rest my way into loving God and being loved by him. You can't do your way into that relationship, right? But being people that truly love and are truly loved by God, that will always lead us into rhythms and patterns of rest. It's like David writes in Psalm 23, he says, "The Lord is my shepherd." The Lord is the one that leads me. The Lord is the one who loves me. There's love for and love from God. And when I love him and he loves me, he leads my life. And because he's leading my life, I shall not want. I shall not worry about the things that I think I need. He makes me. Notice that. It's not he asks me. He suggests that I. It says he makes me lay down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul. When we allow God to lead us in and through our love for him and his love for us, it always leads us to rhythms and patterns of restoration and rest for our souls. Internal intimacy with God leads to external actions that include things like rest. All right? Now, let's look in Genesis chapter 1, okay? Open back up to that. Right? Finally, here it is. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 says this, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and was void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." Right? Just pause right here. I read a book this week that really, to me, kind of opened up this creation story for me. I learned that the Hebrew words for formless and void are real fun words to say. Tohu and bohu, right? Right? It sounds like characters on a TV show. So here's what this means, right? The earth, as the Spirit of God is hovering over this creation, right? There's nothing. It's formless and void. It's tohu and bohu. Formless, which means tohu, is without structure, without order, unproductive, and produces nothing. It can't. Something that is formless can't, by nature, produce anything. It won't produce anything. Why? Because it has no structure. It has no form. It has no order. It's unproductive. Void, bohu, means without content or without substance, which means uninhabited. So when we read this creation story, what we see is it begins with the Holy Spirit hovering over tohu and bohu, hovering over something that produces nothing and that is uninhabited. And so when you read through the creation story, we're going to fly through this. Days 1 through 3, God solves the problem of tohu. No structure, no order, therefore cannot produce anything. And the way God solves the problem of formlessness is he speaks into existence these structures that are needed so that life can flourish. Days 1 through 3, God speaks into existence things like light and dark. He speaks into existence the sea and the land and the sky, all of which are structures and forms that allow and make it possible for life to flourish, right? Then on days 4 through 6, he solves the problem of bohu, right? There's now form and structure that will allow life to flourish, but there's no content. There's no substance. That which has been created is still uninhabited. So what does God do? He creates the sun and the moon and the stars and the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and the animals and people on land. So here's what you have at the end of this story. When all of the structures are in place to allow life to flourish, God then fills creation with life. The author of this book went on to say, God solves the problem of tohu and bohu by bringing form and fullness out of formless emptiness. And I think that's such a cool picture. That God solves these problems by speaking form and structure and all of the things needed for life to be productive. And then he speaks into that, life itself. So let's skip down to verse 31. Here's what it says. After all of this, it says that God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. Which we know this. Very good means it works like it's supposed to. This is how God designed it. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day, right? So that's the end of day 6. So here's what I want you to do. Turn the page. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work, the work that he had done, and he what? Rested. Which means he Sabbathed. Which means Sabbath is a verb. I mean, Sabbath is taking action. When we Sabbath, we're doing something. God, when he Sabbathed, he took action. He took the action of ceasing. God took action to stop creating. It says that he rested. He Sabbathed on the 7th day from all of the work, that workmanship, the things that God did that only God can do. He rested from his occupation of being a creator. He rested from his business of solving the problems of tohu and bohu. He rested from all that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it, come on, God blessed the 7th day and made it holy. There you go. Which, you know, God blessed that 7th day and made it unique and unlike any of the other 6. Why? Because God rested. He Sabbathed from all of his work, all of the business, all of his workmanship, all of the things that only he could do. He rested. He rested from all that he had done in creation. So are you catching the rhythm? Are you catching the rhythm in this moment? Before life was created, there were pre-established forms and pre-existing structures put in place by the love and care of God. Love existed before we did. Because God, through his love and care, created all that we need in order to survive and flourish, right? Those pre-existing and pre-established structures of love, they were there, right? They were woven into the fabric of creation, ultimately allowing our life to flourish. So without those, if you take God's love and care and concern for us, without those structures of care and kindness being established and set in place, there would be no fullness of life. There would be no fullness. There would be no fullness of life. There would be no reflection of love. And so here's where we can go with this. Out of and because of the forms and structures of love that God set in place first, the life then that God created second was now meant to and designed to flourish and grow in and through his love and care. Like, that's how we're created. We are created and designed to flourish in God's love, right? Not just in his creation, but in his love, because his creation is a reflection of his love for us. That's how we're created and designed. We are created to flourish in the love of God. And not only that, human life was designed to flourish in and through God's love and care in such a holy and unique way that our lives themselves reflect God's holy and unlike any other love and care to all creation. Right? For humans, it's different. Like, God creates all this stuff, then he creates us, and when he creates us, he says, let us make them in our image. Let humanity, let men and women reflect the nature and character of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I know this is super heady, right? But here's what I want you, don't miss this. It's completely and totally on purpose that the first full day of life, especially human life, existing, was spent resting in the form and the fullness of God's love and care. You catch that? Like, the first full day, when everything existed, God stopped creating things on day 6. By day 6, he had created everything that he needed to create. And so the first full day of all of creation existing was a day of rest, was a day meant to receive the love and care of God through rest. Before we do anything, before you do anything, receive God's love, care, and kindness. And God steps back from this kind of holy rhythm of rest and love and says, it's very good. This works exactly like it's supposed to. Where before you go work, before you go do, you receive the rest and the love and the care and the kindness of God. I read one really interesting article that said back in kind of Near East, like back in the Near East culture, ancient culture, most people believed that the gods would meet with other people, like little g gods would meet with people in specific spaces. You know, usually up on top of a mountaintop, usually in some kind of a temple. And oftentimes, again, the little g gods back in the ancient days, right, they intentionally put themselves in places that were really hard for people to get, right? Because the little g gods didn't really want to be bothered by the people, right? So if you wanted to worship this little g god, if you wanted to receive from this little g god, you had to get to where they were because they weren't coming to you. You had to get to where they were. And they made themselves hard to get to, right? On purpose. But the interesting thing about God, big G God, the true God, God doesn't meet us in a specific place. What he sets aside in creation is that he meets us in time. He meets us in time. Not at a specific date, not at a specific place, but God meets us in time when we give it to him, when we receive it from him, and that can happen anywhere we are. And I just think that's cool. I think that's a cool thing that God is so different than any other religion, than any other deity that people attempt to worship. God is different because he says, listen, I'll meet with you anywhere. Anywhere you are, I'll come to you. We just got to give each other time. We'll just meet in time. And I think that's really cool. It's a cool aspect of who God is. It shows us his heart. Now, I think it's really important, though, for us to kind of point this out. Before God establishes the holy rhythm and practice of Sabbath rest, what he does first is he actually gives men and women our practical purpose. So he establishes this rhythm of rest, right? On day 7, this is what we're going to do. We're going to rest. But on day 6, when he created people, he actually explains and he tells us ahead of time what our purpose is. Here's what it says. Genesis 1:26. It says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image." The word image is masculine. "And let us make man in our likeness." That word is feminine, right? Let us make men and women. "And then let them as co-equals have dominion," which means to reign and rule in an established territory over all of creation, the fish of the sea, over the birds in the heavens, and the livestock, and all over the earth, and all over every creeping thing that creeps. "And then God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." He gives us a purpose. And here's why knowing this matters. People are given divine purpose by God from the start. But we have to know this. Knowing that these external tasks that are disconnected from internal intimacy, that's counterfeit love, right? We have to understand that. See, God, he establishes our purpose in creation first, but he commands us to practice the holy rhythm of Sabbath before we begin our pursuit of our holy purpose. Which means this. You and I, we are designed by God to pursue a holy purpose out of and from a place of holy rest, and not the other way around. And I think that rhythm of creation is so cool. That God creates and he gives us a purpose. He says, before I'm going to turn you loose to go have dominion over all the earth, we're going to rest. Ben Stewart, in his book called Rest and War, says human beings were made for intimacy, that love for God, and impact, which is loving others and reflecting God's holiness to creation, right? We are made for intimacy. We are made for love from God and for God. We are made for impact. We are made to make our mark on creation by reflecting God to all creation, right? Intimacy and impact. Our intimacy with God determines the impact we make on the world. We cannot have impact without intimacy. Exactly. Right? Jesus makes it really clear. He makes it really simple. You want to know how long Jesus' sermon on Sabbath was? Jesus preached a sermon on Sabbath. It was one sentence. One sentence, Mark 2:27. He says this, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." That's it. Done. But here's what we get from it. The Sabbath is for us. God didn't rest, right? Because he was tired. God rested to establish the rhythm and pattern for us to live an abundant life that pursues our purpose out of and from his love for us first. But here's what we've done with this. Instead of working and pursuing purpose from and out of this place of rest and love, we tend to only rest from working and trying to pursue our purpose out of and from a place of exhaustion and burnout. That's what we've done. And I'll be honest with you, this isn't in my notes, but I was thinking about this last night. The more I thought about this, the angrier I got. Because Satan, who is our enemy, who takes the truth of God and twists it just a little bit. I mean, it sounds real. It sounds right that we should pursue purpose. Purposeless and meaninglessness are some of the greatest fears, right? That my life would add up to and mean nothing. So Satan takes this thing that God created and instills in us, this pursuit of holy purpose, and he twists it just enough so that we begin to worship work instead of worshiping God that provides the work for us. And that just, to me, just makes me angry. That Satan would take something that is good and good for us and use that to hurt us and tear us apart in relationships, in marriages. Let me put it like this, right? Living this way, where instead of working from a place of rest, we only rest when we're exhausted and stressed out and burned out. That's essentially you and I trying to earn the right and ability to rest by proving it to God or our boss or whoever that we deserve it. We deserve rest. Look how hard I've worked. I deserve the right to rest. That's our motto. Work hard, then play hard. But what comes first? Work. Work hard, then you can play hard. And you only get to play if you've worked enough. Let me just ask you this. How's that working out for you? And ask myself that same question. I'm not standing on this stage today preaching and teaching from a place of judgment. I am with you. I am chief among sinners. Because if I could answer that question, I'd go, it's not working out well. It never does. See, if you wait until you're dehydrated and dying of thirst to get a drink of water, you're too late. If you wait until your marriage is in shambles to begin to try to come together and figure out the rhythms of love in that relationship, you're too late. If you wait to rest until you're broken down, burned out, exhausted, you're too late. And I say all of this to help us understand that the pursuit of our holy purpose is not a bad thing. Work is not a bad thing. God created us for work. He gave us work to do. The problem behind so much of what we face is that we flipped the order of importance. One author I read this week said this: we have desire for purpose because we were made on purpose by God, made for the purposes of God, and we were made to run on God's power to accomplish our purpose. And so when we fall away from God, the desire for purpose and power within us still remains, but now it gets displaced upon things that will certainly lead to destruction. There's that desire in us. And that desire is in us for purpose and meaning because God put it there. But he put that there to operate out of a place of love and relationship and rest. And here's the deal. Whenever I talk with folks about the need for Sabbath rest in our lives, what I hear, what I see is like, first off, is an eye roll, right? In fact, Christy and I last night were at a dinner with our son's soccer team. One of the families hosted all of the kids and players and all the parents. And I'm sitting across the table from one of the moms that says, you're a preacher, which you talk about all the air goes out of the room. So like, what do you do, Brad? Work for a church? So is that like your real job, right? Yes, right? I have no other job. I have no other skills. I'm practically useless to the rest of the world, right? And she says, so like, what are you teaching on tomorrow? Sabbath? Ugh. That's what just a big eye roll. Ugh. And she said this, she said, I know we need to rest. I know what Sabbath is. I know we need to rest. But you know what, Brad? It's just not realistic. Why? Because we're just so busy. See, you know. I hear things like, we'll find some rest. We'll find some time to get some rest, right? As soon as things slow down. Yep, me too. And again, I'm chief among sinners. I know for me, when people tell me to rest, usually what comes back at them is less exasperation and more frustration. I become the victim. Well, sure, I'd love to be able to rest, but who's going to take care of everything that needs to be done that only I can do? And I don't know, maybe you're feeling that right now. For me, when I'm approached with this need for rest, I tend to get angry. Because I'm like, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that, but who's going to do all this stuff over here? Right? I become a victim. I feel that feeling. And that's what happens when our pursuit of holy purpose, right, becomes our little g God. When your purpose and your meaning and your work become a thing that you worship, that's what happens. Instead of worshiping in and through our work, we worship our work in hopes that we can prove our worth and our right to earn rest. And if I haven't stepped on your toes yet, here you go. That's called sin. And it's not of God. And it doesn't make God happy. He doesn't think that it's noble. God is not proud of you for working yourself to death. He's not proud of you when your marriage ends or your marriage is on the rocks because your priority is something or someone else. God is not pleased when we neglect ourselves. God is not happy when we neglect him. God is not happy when we neglect our family for the sake of work. God in Scripture doesn't say, well done, tired, burned out, exhausted workaholic. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, hey, whew, you worked your tail off, you deserve a break. No, what God says is, well done, good and faithful servant. And being good and faithful in our service to God implies that we become, right? We are being and we are becoming people that practice the rhythms and patterns of Sabbath rest through obedience and love. It's obedience. Like it says in Psalm 23, he makes us lay down. And sometimes when God is trying to make us like, look, would you just slow down for a minute? What do? We slap his hand away. Get off me. Let me keep going. We disobey God's command for us to lay down, for us to rest, for us to be still. And in doing that, in disobedience, we miss out on love. Anything outside of obedience is not good for you. It's not good for God. It's not faithful. And I know this is hard to hear, right? Me too. I heard one pastor say it like this: if your rhythms and patterns of living don't include soul-restoring rest, lying down in green pastures beside still waters, then you need to be honest with yourself, right? And admit that God is not your shepherd. He's not leading your life. And that you are in fact being led by something or someone else. And all God's people said, ouch, right? I think Sabbath rest is such a struggle for us because we are so afraid that either we won't find purpose because we're resting, or somehow we'll miss out on purpose because we were resting, or that we'll lose our purpose because someone somewhere was willing to work harder than us, and so they got our purpose. They stole the purpose that we deserve because we were resting. Let me just think about this. Did God stop being God on day 7 when he rested? Not a rhetorical question. No. Did God's purpose cease to exist when he rested? No. Did God lose his divine power on day 7? No. Good job. You got them all right. In Sabbath, God's purpose and power, what it does is it shifts from creation, all of this, to us. He doesn't stop being God. He doesn't lose his purpose. He doesn't lose his power. He just re-aims it at us. We become the recipients of his power and his purpose. Why? Because on the Sabbath, we get his full attention. He's just looking at you. And he just wants you to look back at him. And when we Sabbath, our purpose and power, here's the thing. God, being a creator God, the way he made us in his image, he gives us the ability to create. Did you know that? Like when we create something, when we make something, we are reflecting God's power in creation, right? So we have power and we have purpose in creation. And so when we Sabbath, our power and our purpose shifts from ourselves and our own work and creation to him. Now he gets our full attention. And Sabbath rest is not about hurrying up and rushing to be still. You ever known, maybe you got a big meeting the next morning, or you got a class super early, you got a test in the morning, and it's getting late, you've been up kind of preparing, putting your slides together, doing PowerPoint, studying for your test, and you put your head on your pillow, and it's like, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. And it's hard to sleep. Why? Because I got to hurry up and rest. If I don't get sleep tonight, I'm going to fail tomorrow. And it's so hard to go to sleep. That never works. Sabbath rest is a purposeful and protected time to celebrate God and his creation through these rhythms of recreation. Just look at the word recreation. Recreation. When we engage in rhythms of recreation, things that we love, things that bring us joy, it actually recreates in us. We grow again and we are refreshed by joy. And when we engage in rhythms of recreation, that does the work of restoration. Look at the first word in restoration, rest. You cannot have restoration without rest. It doesn't work. It's just oration, which is a completely different thing, right? That renews our hearts and our minds and our souls. And I think for some of us, I'm going to give a couple examples and then we'll be done. I think for some of us, we think that like, all right, Sabbath means I have to turn all the lights off in my house and we all have to sit like in a circle on the floor and light some candles and turn on some worship music for 24 hours. That's it. That's all we're allowed to do. That's not at all what Sabbath is. In fact, that's what the religious leaders, that's what they tried to do. They tried to limit what people could do. And that Jesus, they came to Jesus and said, Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath. And they looked at Jesus and said, you got to stop healing people, man. That's work. You're not allowed to work. And Jesus goes, are you kidding me? Sabbath it's this rhythm of recreation and restoration. What are the things that you love to do? Maybe for some of us, it's going outside and going on a hike. Maybe it's playing games with your family. Maybe it's going to a movie. I don't know. What are the things? What would your life look like if you set aside 24 hours, one day out of 7, one day to rest, 6 days to work, and on that one day, you spent 24 hours in recreation and restoration, doing the things that you love. And maybe some of us, like, I love taking naps. Go for it. How much better would your life be if you protected one day in your week and said, you know what, phones are going off. I am unavailable. What would your life look like if for one day you made yourself unavailable to everything with your work and your purpose? Why? So that you could turn your full attention to God and enjoy his full attention back on you. And I know some of us are like, oh, yeah, man, that would sound awesome. But then all the excuses start firing, right? Why? We become victims because we try to justify why we don't rest. What if instead of making excuses and all the reasons why you couldn't, you said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. Instead of being a victim, I'm going to take responsibility, right? The line between victim and victor runs through responsibility and accountability. I'm going to take some responsibility for my life. And I'm going to set aside 24 hours, one day out of 7, 1 and 6. I'm going to rest 1, work 6. And I'm going to be unavailable. You cannot find me. Why? Because I'm spending time with the people that I love, that God gave me. And we're spending time together loving him and receiving we're giving him our full attention and we're receiving his full attention. Would your life be better? I know mine would. See, in shifting into these holy rhythms and patterns of Sabbath, we move away from living these ragged and restless lives to being and becoming rested and restful. This is the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to worship, right? Sabbath won't happen to you. You have to choose to make it happen. I heard somebody say, you won't ever find time to rest. You have to make time. And just so you know, there's 168 hours in a week. Here's how many God asks for, 24. Out of 168 hours, God asks you for 24. And you go, well, I don't know if I can afford to do that. I'll tell you this, you can't afford not to. And just so you know what percentage that is, it's 14%. God says, give me 14% of your week, you keep the other 86. Why? So you can engage in the holy purposes that he's given you, right? To reflect his love to everyone around you. But give him 24 hours out of 168. Man, I think our lives would be better. And the only reason that's possible is because of Jesus, who we're getting ready to celebrate right now. We take communion every week in here. And in communion, there's two elements, right? There's juice and then there's this cracker, there's this piece of bread, right? Those are designed to reflect Jesus' body that was broken for us and his blood that was poured out for us. And I will tell you, without Jesus allowing his body to be broken and allowing his blood to be poured out to save us, rest wouldn't be possible. We would live restlessness. We would live in restlessness and restless lives forever. But it's in Jesus. That's the only place where our soul finds rest. He says, come to me, all you who are weary, all you who are tired, and I will give you rest. For my yoke, right, my teaching, the life that I offer you fits you like it's supposed to. And so in the time that we've got left to worship and to take communion, we are just going to give Jesus. We're going to come to Jesus so that we can receive rest, right? Maybe in this moment, maybe this is where Sabbath starts for you. It's giving Jesus your full attention for just a handful of minutes. If you could start with a handful of minutes, my guess is you can begin to add to that. Maybe at some point down the road, you'll get up to 24 hours. 24 hours spent receiving the love from God to fuel your life and pursuing the purposes of God. Let's pray. Jesus, we love you. And in this time, Father, my prayer is that we can just kind of let the static and noise of the world subside. And then in a quiet and still place, we can shift our full attention to you and understand that your attention is shifted back on us. You never leave us, you never forsake us. And if we come to you, you will provide us with rest. A peace that is beyond all understanding. So Jesus, I pray that over the marriages in this room, over the parents in this room, and the relationships with their kids. I pray that over, Lord, the desire, that insecurity in us that says, well, if I don't work all the time, then someone's going to steal my purpose. I'm going to lose my purpose. God, I pray that your peace would meet us in those places of fear and doubt and insecurity. So Jesus, in this time, we just give you our attention so that we can receive your love for us. We love you and we pray all this in your name. Amen. Hey, as we worship in this time, if you need prayer, you can meet me down front. If you'd love to talk about accepting Jesus, would love to chat with you about that. If you want to join our church, we'd love to meet you down front. If you don't want to come down front to do any of that, meet me in the back right after service. We can have the same conversations back there. All right, let's take some time, catch your breath, and then we'll worship together.